people are told, the stories of people are told through places. And one of our very dear colleagues, the esteemed Denny Galvin, the former deputy director of the Park Service, used to say the Park Service gets involved where the story hits the ground. So I want to talk to you today about a person, a place, and how they came together as the 433rd unit of the National Park Service on December 16th, 2024, in the form of the Frances Perkins National Monument. And I don't have to tell this audience that a national monument is not a sculpture. Okay. It's a unit of the National Park Service that's established under the authority of the Antiquities Act of 1906. So this is the place. This is the we commonly refer to it as the Frances Perkins Homestead National Landmark, which it was and still is until the more recent designation. It's the only place fully dedicated to telling the story of Frances Perkins, who's been called a remarkable national icon, about whom it's been said few Americans have had deeper influence in labor and social policy in the United States. The monument brings the Frances Perkins Homestead National Historic Landmark into the National Park Service system as a partnership park to continue the work of the Frances Perkins Center, where I've been a board member since 2009. So here's the place. It's often referred to as the brick house because you see it's a brick house, but it's a connected barn complex. The architectural historians refer to this as the big house, little house, back house barn style. It's a pretty, it doesn't have a formal name. The Frances Perkins Center celebrates the life and legacy of the first woman to serve in a United States presidential cabinet at the place that we say shaped her character. She was a social reformer, a government official, Secretary of Labor for 12 years under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the driving force behind groundbreaking New Deal programs that are still the foundation of the United States social safety net, Social Security, unemployment insurance, the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage. And by the way, Social Security has been called the most important anti-poverty program in American history. So some quick facts. She was christened as Fanny Coralie Perkins. She was born in a boarding house in Boston in 1880 to a family who had lived in Maine since the mid-18th century. She grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts. She went to public high school and Mount Holyoke College, where she was a chemistry and physics major. She later got a master's degree at Columbia. She read How the Other Half Lives by Jacob Riis in college, and she said it changed her life. She also saw children working in the textile mills in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and she was horrified. She was an eyewitness to the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. It was the formative experience of her life. Her personal moral commitment to do something about the dangerous and avoidable conditions that resulted in the tragic deaths of 146 workers, mostly young immigrant women. This led her to Albany, New York, to work on laws that became models for the nation. At the time, she was working for the New York Consumers League. She became a factory investigator for the Citizens Committee, looking into how the fire had happened and making sure it wouldn't happen again. Her later work for the governors of New York, Al Smith and FDR, resulted in some of the earliest and best laws to protect workers. She took elected officials with her, dressed like this, okay, to see the dangerous conditions, the lack of fire escapes, locked exits. She worked with legislators. She believed in laws to craft to laws to govern fire safety, building construction, but also machine guarding, heating, lighting, ventilation. She did studies of industries, the chemical industry, metal trades, print shops, textiles, sweatshops, and more. She became industrial commissioner. She was appointed by FDR. She spent 18 years in New York State government. So when she was appointed Secretary of Labor, and people ask us, was it because she was a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt? Well, yeah, sure, but she was a pro. Now, just in case I forget any of the dates, and again, we could do a whole course on her life and legacy, but just to give you the overview, 1880, and I'll cover a lot of these as we go on, but she was a self-made educated woman who never stopped working. And we like her as a role model because she was teaching until she was 85. Okay. When we started offering tours at the site in 2009, a frequent response we got from visitors was why wasn't I taught about her in school? And I've always been proud to say that I was by this dear departed teacher and mentor of mine, Henry Drury, the best teacher I ever had. I saved notes from his class from high school and found them in them a mention of Frances Perkins, but I will admit I don't remember that much about what he taught about her, but he did teach us about her. My interest was piqued when I read Kirsten Downey's book, her biography, as part of getting acquainted with Midcoast, Maine, where I lived for half the year, and what an eye-opener it was. Kirsten Downey says that Perkins was the most effective progressive in American history. Her 2009 biography was not the first, but it's the most compelling. And interestingly, she's a journalist, not a historian, and she found living people who remembered and recalled and wove that into her biography. It's very good. Um, and it happens that that was the beginning of the Frances Perkins Center. It also prompted new interest in new books, like a historical fiction by Stephanie Dray, Becoming Madam Secretary. That's also very good. And a more recent book by a scholar who began her work on Frances Perkins as an intern for the Frances Perkins Center. And she expanded on Frances Perkins' work as the head of immigration, which she was until 1940. And this new book, The Story of Frances Perkins' Efforts to Save Refugees from Nazi Germany, is very good. Frances Perkins was a savvy advisor to FDR. In fact, she only accepted the job as labor secretary on the condition that he would let her pursue a broad program of policy initiatives that she called practical possibilities. These became the foundation of the New Deal. She worked on them with great success through her entire 12 years at his side. Her agenda is an outline of the New Deal. And all of these were achieved except universal health insurance. She asked him to commit to getting federal laws to put people to work on public works, to set up unemployment insurance, old age insurance, health care, end child labor, and more. She was proudest of her accomplishments of Social Security when asked, which was signed into law in 1935. And here you see her as the classic only woman in the room. I don't have to point out which one she is. Um, but these are the members of Congress who had just passed this landmark bill that also created unemployment insurance, which is not always generally known. But I also get a kick out of this picture of all the people who took credit. They were all the electeds, as we refer to them today. When we get to questions, if we have time, asked me to tell you more about what was happening to her on that particular day. And obviously, she's the one sitting right behind FDR. This was her more than her baby. This was incredibly important to her.
She has an interesting look on her face, Sarah.
Yes. Well, I will tell you that an aside is that her husband, who suffered from what we now term bipolar disorder, had gone missing from from the place where he was living, and she had just gotten a call to go to New York to help find him. She did find him. but she was a little distracted. Nevertheless, here she is. One of the few instances where she actually took credit for something that she chaired the Committee on Economic Security that met to hash out what the Social Security bill would be. And again, her purview included a great, she was very interested in public works, what we would call infrastructure now, because it was a way to put people to work. It wasn't, it was very much a program that was, had many facets and different programs. We can talk about those later. Again, we address this in a course that we cover, but she was especially interested in the work created by building bridges, roads, tunnels, and rural electrification, which these days would be equivalent to expanding broadband internet. And she was a key strategist developing this legislation. And she also sat on the panels that chose the projects, and they were in every state. She was instrumental in getting one of the most popular and important projects of the New Deal going, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, which was one of the very first. And again, she somehow or another, and it's still hard to believe, they placed 250,000 men in jobs at 1,300 camps throughout the country within 3 months. Um, how this was done is a story in itself. And eventually, 3 million young men were put to work in the course of this program. They planted 2 billion trees. They built roads. They also created 800 state parks. This was a quite an interesting development in the whole concept of state parks. And again, she never retired. After she served as Secretary of Labor, she was on the Civil Service Commission. And she went around the country speaking to young people, encouraging them to have careers in public service. This is an image of her lecturing at Cornell University, where a new school of industrial and labor relations was being founded, and she was a very popular lecturer there. But let's get back to this place that we're preserving, because I know you're interested in that. Again, this was not an elegant mansion, as some people thought when they heard Perkins came from an old Maine family. Those were not her entire, her family didn't own all those oxen. Those were the neighborhoods, the neighbors all pitched in when they were doing a big project and lent each other the livestock to move buildings and other things. But this was her house, as she knew it. This again, it was her grandmother's house. This was actually the third house that was built on this homestead that was originally 200 acres. It's now 57 acres. And again, this was the kid growing up in the city. This is where she went to grandma's house for the summer. She also came back here every year of her life. It was a very important place to her. The farm, and she always referred to it as the farm, also had a brickyard like this one, where the family supplemented their agricultural income making bricks for export and to build buildings here in Damascus and Newcastle, Maine, and also beyond. They were exported to various places. She came here every year, mostly in the summer, but also at Labor Day when she hosted a neighborhood picnic and where she learned of Hitler's invasion of Poland and had to return to Washington very rapidly. This was in around 1939. She was also a wife and mother. She took this snapshot at the homestead on the tidal river, the Damascus River, where her family had settled around 1750. In 2012, the Frances Perkins Center opened an exhibit in a downtown storefront in a key location in a community whose population triples in summer. I was enlisted to design the exhibit. and called on colleagues and family to help. This was a low budget, if not no budget, effort, very much a grassroots effort of friends and colleagues who wanted to get something started. We offered tour programs with interactive discussions in the woodshed. We're back in the barn now to get to know our visitors, and they're very interesting. We've met all kinds of interesting people, some of them neighbors or people who worked for the family, others distinguished scholars and officials from Washington, D.C., who were curious about this place. We've had, again, this is when the family still owned the property, but the center was getting started. We had an annual garden party with notable honorees, and we always combined substance with having fun. Some of the honorees we celebrated, you probably know William Leuchtenberg, the dean of the New Deal historians. Here is Sarita Gupta, who at the time was an activist with Jobs with Justice. She's now a program senior official with the Ford Foundation, and Ron Phillips, who's the founder and director of a local statewide community economic development corporation. Again, and I will say, Bill Leuchtenberg noticed our storefront, dropped in, and was ashamed that he had not featured and highlighted and written about Frances Perkins in his histories. And he made it up to us by speaking at our parties year after year. And he was a great guy and very, very interesting and entertaining, and we miss him. We also offered to speak at the local high school and any place else where they would have us. And here I am, right after the pandemic, when nobody told us that they couldn't figure out how to get the basketball net up. So we just made do. And again, we had a great time with the students, and this is what this organization is all about. But also, we followed the approach that I had learned as a National Park Service professional. We started with assessing the condition of the building. Lynn Spencer, who is on the left, is the head of a preservation planning and architecture practice who's been with us since 2011. She did the basic work and then has continued on with us. What you see are the bricks that were actually removed from the basement, and I'll show you a picture of what it looked like before. This one of the first things we always were taught, Heather, right, was to make sure the structure is sound. Well, if you look at, these are trees holding up this house. When the engineers came to visit, they said, "You have gatherings of more than 8 people in the dining room. Please don't. Please don't. It is not, it's not safe." And again, all those bricks were the floor of the basement. They were all removed. Underneath, we discovered a whole layer of schist that had been mined also on site. It was, again, it allowed us to repair it and put it all back so that it looks the same, but it doesn't, it's not wet anymore. We documented the whole 57-acre site and submitted it a nomination as a National Historic Landmark, which was accepted in 2014. We underwent extensive peer review. We did the research, and that allowed us to apply for funding from the National Park Service Save America's Treasures program. That it was a quite strategic decision to go for that designation because we didn't have time to fool around with $10,000 grants. We needed big money to address the structural problems of deferred maintenance of this property.
How much did you get?
We got $500,000, which we matched multiple times. We finally purchased the property. We had to raise the money to buy it from, this is Frances Perkins' grandson, Tomlin Coggeshall on the right. who very much wanted to get this project going, wanted this place saved, wanted this story told. But this family never had the money to be able to donate it. They also never had the money to damage it by, quote, modernizing it. So it was kind of like a times capsule right through 1965 when Frances Perkins died. Um, we raised over $5 million from lots of small, medium, and large donors, mostly who had a connection to Midcoast Maine, and or her friends, the family friends, or families and friends of all of us. And as I said, we always combine fun with substance. We treat our speakers very well, and you can't really identify them, but the gentleman in the gray shirt in the foreground is David Ferriero, who at the time was had just stepped down as the Archivist of the United States. And he was the fellow who you probably know identified that all those boxes that should
Come
have been
in.
in the National Archives were at Mar-a-Lago. So years of deferred maintenance, they had to be corrected, and we didn't even have a parking lot. So grants and donations made it safe and accessible to host the public. Here we are, groundbreaking on our Save America's Treasures project. It was $500,000. We matched it several times over. We needed to. I think I muted myself by mistake. We raised the barn. These are guys who lift barns up because traditionally Maine barns are built without foundations, and this one needed to support a lot of use. So we lifted it up, built a foundation that looked very much as though it should have been there, and put the building back. The restored barn is now used as a multi-purpose space for exhibits and programs. We reinforced the roof that had suffered from the installation of a dormer that had compromised the structure. We replaced the porch, which had been removed, and we were able to do this because of the historic photos that had been retained and building remnants that were in the barn. And it's one of the good things about Maine. People never throw anything out, so you can do a pretty accurate historic, it would be called a reconstruction. We don't do those in the Park Service, right? Right, Heather? We don't do reconstructions, but it was a good restoration. We reopened in 2023 after the major preservation and restoration work. This is just a reminder that we depend on volunteers. These are the esteemed members of our stewardship committee. Peter Benton on the left, who some of you may know is a quite well-known preservation architect who volunteers pro bono for us. And on the right is my husband, Bill Kelly, who is a retired a molecular biologist who's enlisted to do everything. Now you wonder how this got to be a national monument, and it's obviously a long story, but it was actually a fairly quick story in this case. I'm sure many of you are aware that there was a study and an executive order about a year ago by President Biden that there should be to the effect that there should be more sites about women in the national park system. And after a survey of all the potential landmarks, ours rose to the surface because we had been operating as though it might become a national park site sometime in the future. We weren't planning on it imminently, but we were following best practices. And when the team came to see whether this might be feasible and to explore the site, they were really impressed. And what you see here is a community meeting that we organized to consider the national monument status. And we were very fortunate to have Secretary Deb Haaland and Shannon Estenos, who was the Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, a very important official, our entire congressional delegation, but also neighbors and others. Now, all of this was launched by the National Park Conservation Association, NPCA, really put a huge effort behind the lobbying towards it, as did our executive director, Giovanna Gray Lockhart, who you see next to the secretary. And some of you may recognize, I know a lot of people in this group and everywhere follow Heather Cox Richardson, and there she is. She's our neighbor. She's been a real fan and supporter of the center. She's written about Frances Perkins several times. And we gave her the last word at the community meeting, and she basically said, "Here, here, why not? Keep up the good work." Um, again, long story short, this is the day the proclamation was signed in December 16th. We had almost given up. It was towards the end of the administration, but we kept getting letters, and we eventually had 5,000 letters of support from all sorts of people from over a really very short period of time. Um, this is the day that the arrowhead was delivered to our little tiny staff, and our one uniform National Park Service contact person. Unfortunately, I think she is for now the only National Park Service assigned person. We've had others assisting, but not. We had hoped we would have summer staff, but that doesn't look as though it's going to be. And I just want to show you just a few images, and I'll be quiet, of what the place looks like now, and then we can get to some questions. So again, this is one season. These are the woods where Frances herself loved to walk. This is the shore. You can still see the remains of the bricks. This was her favorite room. It was a sitting room. And again, people on tours say, "Oh, I had those dishes." Again, this is not a stately mansion. These are everyday kinds of things that people relate to. And we can go to questions. And I'll stop, right? Okay,
Thank you, Sarah. That's great.
great.
And I told you in an email, I'm going to be in Maine. The cottage I'm renting is the postal address is Damariscotta. So I will, I was just talking to my friend who's arranged all of this earlier this afternoon. So once we get a plan together, I'll shoot you an email.
Right, right. I should say that sadly, one thing that is on our near-term agenda is that Tomlin Perkins Coggeshall died right after the proclamation was signed. He was not old enough, and he was doing fine. And just the cancer that he was being treated for got the best of him.
Oh,
So and we're having a memorial service for him on the 31st of May. So our hands are a little full with a lot of people coming in for that. So
yeah, that's the day I'm leaving.
I was going to say, that's the one day I would say I can't promise you a
Yeah.
VIP
Okay,
tour.
that's the day I'm flying back to Ohio. So
Yeah,
So
okay. But
let me say
yeah,
that what they
yeah.
did here is a case study and a textbook example of how to do it right. They clearly had some good luck in terms of Lechtenberg and people like that, but they also, what isn't, she's not showing and making a deal about is how much hard work it takes. How many times you're writing yet one more email, one more letter, putting together one more whatever, when you don't really feel like doing it. And I think that's where you had Perkins as a guide,
Yeah, yeah.
what you were doing. So,
And a lot of people talk about this in a very personal way. I actually gave a little interview to my college alumni magazine. Um, when I read that book and really learned about this woman in government who wasn't elected, but who worked in government. I said, I never had a role model like that. I wish I had known. And so people really relate to her very personally. Another thing I didn't even have a chance to mention that could be a whole talk in itself, is how important her faith was to her. And again, she was extremely private. She did not leave a diary. So we were having to tease out of, she did leave a quite extensive oral history, but you have to go to Columbia University to read it. It's recently, a lot of it has actually been, it was transcribed, and a lot of it is now available online. But she just isn't that well known. When her biographer talks about coming to town, and this was, in the 2000s, it wasn't that long ago, asking around, and no one had heard of her. No one knew she had anything to do with this place, just kind of around town. And for someone to be that important, um, male or female, and to people, for people just not to know. But again, because she was very private, some of this was her husband's health. But again, her faith was extremely important. The Episcopalians know about her, and around the same time that we were getting started, the center was getting started. I think it was 2010. There was a contest that was run, to who's your favorite Episcopalian, who ought to be a saint. And it was sort of a half, it was a fun thing. I forget who organized. It was a national campaign. And people were sending in and nominating. And anyway, and she actually, as a result of around that same time, she was given a Saint's Day, and named a holy woman of the Episcopal Church, which my friends tell me is like being a saint. So again, I wouldn't want to comment, but there is an icon to her in her parish. There's a lovely Victorian church called St. Andrew's in town where she worshiped, and she was a very active summer member when she was here, and they're very fond of her. And again, there are people who knew her. So that was another important aspect of her life.
Maureen,
Yes, Sarah, I just want to say congratulations on this
Thanks.
accomplishment. And this is really your legacy. It is just amazing. I'm wondering, once the house came under the National Park Service, how did operations change? Are there like rules, government rules that you had to abide by that you didn't have to when it was a private entity?
Yeah. And this is happening, as we say, in real time, because we signed agreements. We had to donate the property that we had just raised a lot of money to buy. And we had to donate it um, before the proclamation was signed, which was very scary as a board to do, because you never know. But we did that. It actually wound up, well, it's sort of getting technical, but it wound up being just the buildings, not the entire site, because the rest of the site is subject to a conservation easement. And the land trust that owns the conservation easement didn't have time to get their board together in time to donate the rest of the property. The intent is for the whole property to become. But in answer to your question, there are extensive agreements outlining basically the relationship, and that we promise to follow all the rules and regulations of any National Park Service site. But what's important is that the center retained ownership of the collections, and also the right to build well, first of all, to finish we're still finishing a little bit of the work. We have plans to build a small education building on the site that we designed that would really allow us to house our archives and to do contemporary exhibits and so forth. So we reserved those rights. It was all fine. We had hoped that we would get staff, as I said, this summer. And right up until a couple weeks ago, we thought we would, but we're sort of what would you call it? The foster child of Acadia National Park. So they've lent us a one person. We've also had access though and had visits from the people again forget that the Park Service is also again it's so important that it's a system and the offices, the centers that provide research and technical assistance on collections management and on historic buildings. And we've had site visits from those folks. But again, I think maybe you don't know, we know these folks are working under terribly stressful conditions. Their offices are being closed. I mean, our project manager went to pick up the new sign that was being made, and her credit card had been changed to allow only $1 worth of authorization. So she went to pick it up, and I will tell you, I mean, this is a single mom who lives in, and again, we're a foster child of Acadia, but it's 2.5 hours away. She had to find somebody. There's one person in the regional office who has access to the credit card. She found that person um, to go pick up the sign. She paid for the sign. She brought it down and dropped it off, said, here you are, folks, and went back to pick up her kid from after school care. So this is the dedication of Park Service people who are working under extreme conditions, and we're very grateful. To answer your question quickly, we're just now we're developing our own collections policies to be consistent with. We're consulting with. I was involved, as Heather knows, with the activation of half a dozen new national park sites. And they never get started instantly. And I always caution people, take time, we're doing it right. Don't expect everything to happen the first summer. We're all learning. I mean, I never lived through a situation like this. But the older people, I remember the very first superintendent I worked with, and this was again in Lowell, getting the Lowell National Park started. And that had unusual legislation that was set up with a federal commission that was kind of institutionalized the grassroots movement and the local state coalition that got the park legislation passed was then written into the law to help get the park started, and then the Park Service would run it forever. And I was the planning director for that commission that was getting things started, and we were all a bunch of young, energetic folks, and we wanted everything done instantly. And the park superintendent was trying to calm us down when we were getting upset, and he said, "Don't worry, in 20 or 30 years, this will all work out fine." And we said, 20 or 30 years. Well, I'm now the old gray-haired lady telling people, be calm. In 20 or 30 years, this will all be fine. Again, the Park Service is slow, but that's because things are done carefully and authoritatively, and they're done right. And those are the standards that we subscribe to. And so we're going to be patient for a practical matter. What it means this very first summer of our operation, we're going to be operating pretty much the way we did on our own, which is with some interns, a small staff, some board members as volunteers, and we're doing the best we can. We'll do the best we can.